We seem to be a bit stally. How's the feed at your end, Owen?
Yeah, seems okay, Scott. Seems okay.
I'd say it just looks like it's a bit cloggy at my end. Right. My name is Scott Haslam. I am the branch secretary for Leeds number 1. And that looks better. And I put on a live stream last month, and I talked about the importance of democracy. And today we launch a candidate. Well, I don't launch a candidate, but we're going to talk to a candidate in this mini series. So, with that in mind, I will pass you over to Owain Beamont, who's the branch secretary incumbent in Scotland number 2, just to introduce yourself and set the scene.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott, and thank you for having me on. My name's Owain Beamont, and I'm standing in the upcoming NEC PEC elections. One of the main reasons, obviously, trying to stand, and I'm pretty sure everybody's already heard, the Voice for Scotland, to try and get somebody who will speak up for Scotland on one of our biggest tables. It's no secret that we did see quite a raw end of the network change, and the anger and the apathy up here is pretty poor. But also, given that apathy and the agreement, I want to make sure that the executive is on the ball now in terms of rebuilding, because the apathy felt by the membership, and again, trying to not repeat the same word again, it's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require a lot of work to get us close to where we were before the dispute. But I believe we can. I believe it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of trying to reconnect the membership. And trying to rebuild this union pretty much from the ground again. It's a nice wee intro.
Thanks for that, Owen.
No problem.
So, in your election address, you've covered off 4 specific points. One is about network and the network change across the Royal Mail network. The second was about the dispute. The third being about the rebuilding, which you've just briefly touched on, and about the USO reform.
Yep.
So, in terms of the network, what is, well, I suppose there's 2 questions. Is what is the real problem with it? And what really is the solution?
Interesting. Yes, I like those questions, Scott. The problem with network window and the problem we're starting to face now is something that we probably all could have predicted. Obviously, we got the extensive PIR in Scotland to try and help us mitigate that change. And to be perfectly honest with you, the entire process has been a little bit of a joke. Surprise, surprise. We kind of need an executive now that's going to be able to look at the network window, realize what's broken, and realize why the service isn't quite where it was supposed to be. Look, I think everybody knew that what Royal Mail told us was going to happen in network window was never going to be spot on perfect, but we're light years away from where it needs to be now. Personally, we're all starting to feel like Royal Mail don't want to listen. They don't want to move. They're quite happy with where it is. And if anything, they want to take the lazy route and push people in the other direction and move them even further. It was almost like a bad plaster that got ripped off eventually, network window in Scotland, where the damage was so bad. And it's not just Scotland. I need to stop saying that. There was other areas of the country that were really dramatically impacted and had to watch GID postal workers walk out the door because they couldn't accept the change. And what's happened is new recruits have replaced these people. Some of our units are getting close to 50-50 now in terms of what we call legacy staff and new recruits. And that's all down in the window. So now for us going forward, it's all about trying to claw back some of the damage now. And I've said it numerous times, whether that's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the Saturdays seem to be a big focus for our membership. We need to start getting little wins. We need to start getting these wins now because members are starting to lose the faith that the network window and the mitigation that could be done by the union, they're starting to realise that that's probably not achievable, and we need to reverse that. And that comes with being able to hold, especially senior managers in Royal Mail, to account and start making them listening to our field officials. I think that probably covers the network window, hopefully.
Yeah, I think back to I suppose Royal Mail has this habit of reinventing the wheel, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But one thing that happened before they took the trains out, I suppose originally, the TPOs and that, is that we had an NDN network, which is a neighbouring district network, as I recall. And what that was 7.5 tonners connecting mail centre to mail centres and getting the traffic, I suppose, in the trunk of the country, in the middle of the country, and equally the bits at the bottom, to the mail centres earlier. So actually, that is something that I think is missing slightly with trying to connect Scotland to the rest of the country, because everything is hubbed and spoked. So you've got things maybe in certain mail centres that could go more direct to Scotland rather than via Warrington and such, which may speed the network up a little bit. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think there needs to be a bit more scrutiny about that and how this network should be connecting.
Yeah, and I mean, look, just to touch on a little bit of local, because obviously I'm obviously going to have a better understanding of what's going on in our area. So our local mail centre happens to be Edinburgh, one of the biggest ones. And in the network window, the final feed was supposed to be rocking up into Edinburgh Mail Centre with a maximum of 200 Yorkies. That's never happened once since network window went in. And in fact, for it to be 400 and 600 isn't uncommon. Now, that's not just you getting it a little bit wrong. That's not you just making the normal mistakes that Royal Mail make when they try and plan and forecast these things. Something's inherently broken there if it's that far out from what we are. And again, we talk about the 90-20 split, the 90-10 split in the feeds, which is obviously what was supposed to help our delivery offices and try and mitigate that change. That's a pipe dream. And in some cases, it's as bad as 50-50, sometimes with what rolls up on that last lorry. And this is why the biggest fear now is a lazy solution to this problem. It's just to ask the postal workers to swallow more change and to just go further back rather than trying to fix the problem. Because let's be honest, there's no incentive there for Royal Mail to try and fix this problem. It's almost like the damage has been done now. Yeah, it's not nice. And again, I don't like focusing on that, but that's obviously just my own local knowledge. You'll find things like that happening all over the country in the network. And the executive need to be the ones that are kind of holding Royal Mail to account on this and making sure that everybody's trying to pull into the same wavelength, if you like. Try and make sure we're servicing the faraway places first to try and mitigate the damage.
Yeah. See, this is an interesting point about when you say holding the company to account, because there's sort of two aspects to that. One is the post executive works within the postal departments, but also its primary function is to hold the officers to account, because they're the chief negotiators for the respective departments, ultimately under the DGSP. So it's, in some sense, it's holding the officers to ensure that they're putting as much pressure onto the company as much as it is where the executive then deals on little projects and holds the company to the account to deliver the best little agreements, isn't it? So it's a double outcome really that you have as an executive member. So that's why it's vitally important that members understand what they're voting for, why they're voting, and in the candidates and what they're standing for, because it's a double-edged sword. They're representing members against the company, but also for our leadership as well within the union.
Totally agree, Scott. It's just as big that we actually hold our national officers of a union to account as much as Royal Mail sometimes. At the end of the day, that's the job of the executive. That's why they sit where they do. Our national officers have got to make sure that they're pressuring Royal Mail regardless of whether it's network window or any other numerous issues that we could pick out. Your executives there to try and hold these guys to account and make sure that they are constantly pushing Royal Mail on the issues that affect our members at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So just give you a bit of a positive. Someone you know, Mr. Knox.
Oh, there he is. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So Owain, there's a future of our union, exactly what we need to take us forward and to rebuild our union. So, much that's quite pertinent where we're talking about executive and holding the officers account. But actually, when we're talking about the national executive, right? There's a clear distinction there between the postal and the national, because if members elect you, Owain, onto the national executive, you're not only going to be dealing with the postal side of stuff and, you know, working in projects on behalf of officers and then holding the postal officers to account, but actually you'd be in the room talking about bigger political things, talking about the structure of the union. And I think, certainly from our perspective in Leeds, we genuinely believe that the national executive needs to have as broader, and I don't like using the phrase, but a broad church approach where we have all geographies covered, as many functions as possible covered, and also different age demographics as well. Because Peter's right, you're one of the younger candidates. You know, you can disclose how old you are if you wish. I won't press on it.
38, it's no secret.
I was going to say certainly in your 30s. So that is relatively young for the executive, which is good because you're showing that passion and drive. I think that we need to move on to the next step. But I just wonder if you talk about sort of the importance really and the differences on the national executive and why maybe you'll be a good fit for that.
Yeah, it was actually a question I had to deal with from a member today, actually up in Elgin, that was obviously asking me to try and explain the difference. Because again, our members, it's and whether it's a fault of our union nationally, sometimes our members really do struggle to understand what our executives actually do. And again, trying to explain that the national executive looks after the more political side of the aspects, because quite a lot of our members don't even realise that there's more than just Royal Mail within our union. And so having to even just explain that, the CWU covers a broader range. Obviously, we've got the telecom side of things as well as our other colleagues that all fall under that umbrella. And for me, the biggest thing that our national executive are going to have to deal with right now is the struggles that we're going to face as a trade union going forward. They're now in discussions right now about how we restructure our union going forward, how we can make it more modern. Help it. Obviously, that there's no secret. Obviously, as the jobs have obviously started to decrease in the company, it would be no secret to guess that obviously the membership's obviously started to decrease ever so slightly because of that as well. And again, that's not a Royal Mail issue. That's also an issue that they're feeling in BT as well. And we need to get that restructuring right. Because the biggest fear I've got with restructuring, and it's a massive fear that we have, if we build to shrink, there's no room there for growth. And if we go too far, the members will suffer. So I'm all for restructuring. We can be smarter with how we operate as a union, but the members have to be first. The service that we give them can't falter, can't slip in any way, shape, or form. And that doesn't matter where you are in the country. That has to remain the same. The national executive as well has got a massive challenge in how we're going to restructure our union going forward. And again, it needs fresh ideas because we're going to be building a more modern union now going forward. And the biggest one, again, touching on the national executive and the bigger political landscape, we've now really have to push hard on these anti-trade union laws. I'm sorry, but this dispute showed it up. For how difficult it is now for trade unions to operate in this country. It's disgusting, really. It's actually disgraceful how many times we got dragged into court far too many times. Other trade unions are having the exact same issue. So we have to push whichever government's in charge. Obviously, we've got a Labour government in charge now, but they have to be held to account. The trade unions have to be the first one to try and claw some of these laws back, because we can't go into a dispute like that again. It's almost like walking into a dispute handcuffed, because you can't quite operate within the realms that Royal Mail can operate. And when it comes to the legal team, the costs and what Royal Mail can actually blow on something like that is obviously frightening, given the size of the company. So yeah, we have to make sure that the political aspirations of the trade union and all our members are being chased up as well. And that's kind of your big difference between obviously your national executive and your postal executive, where your postal executive obviously a little bit more industry specific in terms of the Royal Mail side of things.
Very compelling. We've got obviously you got your divisional rep is watching, so it's nice to see we've got George Ross on.
Nice.
We've got another comment from somebody who I know who goes under the secret squirrel tag. So I think it's relevant at this point because the union needs fresh young people with current knowledge of workplace workforce issues, and also to give the odd kick up the bum to complacent senior reps finding their time till retirement. I mean, obviously, I don't think necessarily that that's 100% accurate, but we understand the sentiment, Mr. Squirrel. But I think it's pertinent to this because younger people coming in, because we need the next generation. I mean, one of the key things that I've been working on, certainly within my branch since taking over, is very much looking for the next generation of trade union activists, and that ties into, we need to be looking at who's the next generation of area reps and who's the next generation of division reps. While we've had actually a good flurry of different of retirements, haven't we, in terms of the division, and we've had a lot of new divisional reps come on board. So we've kind of seen that happening at divisional level, and I think there's a lot of branches now going through this transition. Scotland number 2, no dissimilar than Leeds, with yourself, Owen, coming in. And now you're looking at going to the executive, and I think that's a natural. It's how it's natural, isn't it? That you come through the ranks, and now you're going to the executive. So, in terms of the importance of youth in our union, in the industrial sectors as well, how important is that from your view, and what is it that you're going to be sort of looking at, whether you're elected or not, to be honest?
When it comes to the young workers, especially given the changes that we've seen, obviously, given the dispute, quite a lot of people have left. And most of the time, it happens to be our senior people that have probably walked out the door, maybe a bit earlier than they planned to. The dispute had a massive impact on that. Obviously, excuse me. Obviously, all the changes in the workplace didn't help. So now, of course, we've got the next generation of postal worker coming through as well. And you're watching that demographic change. So that demographic needs to change in our union as well. Because young people, especially nowadays, young people, when they're coming into the workplaces, and people who have went out there and tried to recruit membership will know exactly what I'm talking about. The youth now, they're not taught about trade unions. It doesn't come through our schools, and any sort of media publicity we seem to get does tend to be fairly negative. And it's a very different tact that you need to take now to try and recruit our young people coming through. There does need to be a little bit more explanation. They do need to be almost sold the union a little bit more than maybe the previous generations ever did need to. That's so important. And I always point, when we're talking about young people and we're talking about trying to, I was at STUC a few years ago, and it was a fantastic movement which was called Trade Unions in Schools. And listening to 13, 14-year-old children talking about the miners' strikes, talking about the political issues. At the time, it was obviously the horrible Tory idea of obviously Rwanda and then migrants. Listening to young people talk passionately about these issues of the day, it really is moving. We've got to be at the forefront of that as a trade union. We have to be at the forefront of that as a union. Watching young people coming through, we've actually said it at branch level, how great it would be to actually get a new recruit on new terms and conditions actually come through as a rep, so that voice never stops, so that there's always going to be someone there speaking up for these people. I love engaging with young postal workers. I do. I think it's fun. Look, I love engaging with all postal workers, but when you hear young people get passionate about their trade union, it really is moving. And it's something that we constantly need to keep focusing on to bring the next generation through. And sometimes we can be accused of, and we have to hold our hands up, especially in the trade union movement, of not allowing that progression to sometimes happen. And the same faces constantly keep appearing all the time, and they stay in their roles. We've had, clearing out's the wrong word, but we have had a lot of people that have decided to move on now. This is a great chance for new faces, fresh faces to come in, but they need to make a difference. They need to start getting results for people on the ground. And no one sees that more than the young workers that are coming through the door right now, that are obviously coming in on the inferior terms and conditions into workplaces that are not great. They're not great at all. Offices still failing to clear. And then when you and I first started, Scott, it was almost like a badge of honour that you always made sure the shifts were clear, and that they're coming in a completely different world now. And we need to get that pride back in the union and in their workplaces as well. And the young people are key to that. So yeah, that's a small. I'm saying small. that's my input on the younger people coming through. Definitely needs to be supported more, and long may it continue. Let's see a lot more young people coming through our movement.
Excellent. I like how you touched on there on the new terms, because it is a union policy that that they're a priority to get their terms and conditions leveled up, and I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that somehow the union agreed to those terms, but actually that's complete false. What the union's actually agreed to get a settlement and to move it forward and start developing and the ideas of broadening the role of postal workers and everything else is very much about how can we level up the terms that meets everyone's aspirations, isn't it? So what I mean by that is we haven't agreed to it, but what we've agreed is a framework really to look at leveling it up. So in terms of leveling it up, what do you see the leveling up of new terms being? Because I generally can't see how they will just reinstate the old contract, right? So I think there's going to have to be some sort of I suppose agreed next generation of contracts that is sympathetic with the existing agreed terms, but maybe it might live under a monthly pay situation, for instance. Just wondering, have you thought about them sort of ideas of the new terms of where they might need to go?
Yeah, Scott, and to be honest, what you're saying is perfectly sensible. I think, again, it's Royal Mail make no secret about the state of the finances of the business. Apologies. No, make no secret about the state of the finances of the business, and that's obviously why they took the horrendous decision to impose those terms and conditions to begin with. Trying to level up these people is obviously going to come with a big, massive price tag. The biggest fear I had, and I've always been very, very vocal about the new entrance terms and conditions ever since they came in, because I saw it, and I've called it this a few times, and I think I said the words at conference as well. It's the perfect Trojan horse for Royal Mail, because what it does is it undermines the union going forward. So every single pay deal that comes, every single attack on the terms and conditions come. I heard it described quite well as a nice little seesaw. And once that seesaw tips and there's more people on the inferior terms and conditions than there are the legacy staff, and we all know what happens. You don't have to look far in other industries to have seen this happen before. It's not a revolutionary move. Royal Mail haven't pulled a rabbit out of the hat here. It's 101 in the playbook if you want to downgrade workers' terms and conditions. The biggest fear I had with the upscaling side of things, I understand what you're trying to say there, Scott, was that as time went on, it would feel like as a union that priority would start slipping down our priority list. I mean, obviously, with all the things that the union's tackling on numerous fronts now. I mean, I could only touch on 4 or 5 because I was restricted to 300 words in my statement. But there's numerous fronts that we're having to hold the business on account to, and leveling up those new terms and conditions has to remain priority number one. Now, I get there might need to be concessions in terms of how they get leveled up, and is it done in stages? Is it done in steps? Personally, for me, I believe it should tie in perfectly with the USO reform that's coming around the corner. Look, it's no secret that the USO reform, or in any shape or form, is going to have a tag of money attached to it that is going to save the business. That's going to be no secret. And Royal Mail, that's why they want it. And that's obviously why they're trying to negotiate with the union and the regulator to obviously come to some terms for that. But you have to balance that, because obviously we've got our legacy staff that are entitled to their pay rise come April as well, which also has to remain really high on the priority list too. I just think with this USO reform, I think there's a perfect chance to try and embed it. I have heard that Royal Mail, it's the Sunday working that they're a bit scared of, that they're a bit apprehensive of. Because obviously the legacy staff that we've got remaining, and I hate calling them that, to be honest, because I consider myself, but it seems to be the terminology. But the legacy staff, the members that are left, obviously don't want to be forced to work a Sunday. Nobody wants to be forced to work a Sunday. But the fact that we only had the 6-day working in our contracts, does that mean we sell out the next generation to make sure that they have to work that Sundays? Or, as I keep pointing out, and I use the LAT product as a perfect example, do we start to try and come up with some innovative duty patterns that will attract our members to take up some of that workload? Now, it's not going to be popular to work a Sunday. No one will find that popular. But when you start offering innovative duty patterns and a decent work-life balance, 4-day weeks, 9-day fortnights, things like that, I can go for it. We saw it happen. I remember I was a local rep when we introduced the LATs, and I remember our postie said, who is going to do that work? Who could possibly want to work that late in the day? And eventually we attracted a 4-day week contract out of it, and it was all our existing staff that took up those contracts. We didn't have to advertise them out. So my answer to the business with that is this is where the union needs to come in here and almost not force our members to track, but try and convince our members to follow the workload by offering them a better work-life balance to see if they can take up that workload. For me, anything else in terms of leveling up it's not off the table. I would never say it's not off the table. But for me, almost everything else is almost a no-go area. I don't agree with anybody earning separate wages from the man or woman who's working there alongside them. I don't think that's fair. I think it's disgusting and disgraceful. And we're noticing that in our high attrition rates. And the terms and conditions are just as important as the pay element of that. Like obviously we see the things that are in the new terms and contracts for them. And it is disgusting when you think of the generations of postal workers that obviously got themselves to that stage for those terms and conditions, all the strikes over the years, all the different generations of postal workers who stood up, who basically formed that contract, if you like, that me and you and all the other postal workers have enjoyed throughout our working life. We can't deny that of the next generation. We just can't. It's almost a case of that we need to try and eradicate this as quickly as possible. And I think the USO reform is our best example. Is our best chance, rather.
No, I fully agree with what you just said there in terms of the USO for sure. And I just want to put in this of our good friend Pete. And in what he said is that leveling up, well, what he's saying is improving terms isn't good enough. It has to be the same. You say, my view is, and I think Pete's right, but sometimes you can actually look at leveling up the terms in a different way, but actually it's as good, if not better. It's packaged in a different way. So, for example, the cost implications of paying someone monthly is considerably less to the company than it is weekly. Therefore, actually, you can pay the same terms and conditions just monthly, and actually there'll be quids in. So, if you can repackage the look at some concessions which perhaps aren't really concessions because they're already on monthly pay. And I believe that's what happened when we consider what happened with the professional drivers agreement back in 2007. We went from weekly to monthly pay, put everything together. You got a multiplier on your overtime. You had a single overtime rate. And although we were no real better off in 2007, the 2 degrees of separation analogy means that as you fast forward to 2024, suddenly now it's a gold standard. And I do think if they did it right for the delivery, well, they're not delivery, but certainly the new, to agree a new contract, that could become the new gold standard rather than it being the same as everything else, if not worse, compared to your competitors, whether that be in Aldi or Amazon or whatever. I mean, I don't know what the job competition is around Edinburgh, but certainly in the Leeds, Wakefield area where our branch sits, there is a lot of different employers about, and they are all offering a similar hourly rate, except it's warm because you're not out on the streets. You're not having to look or plan toilet breaks because there's a toilet on tap. Do you see what I mean? So the need to factor in these sorts of things. And then I don't know if you've ever come across those members that, because there's a requirement to have a driving license in there rather than back in the sort of 90s, early 90s, where you didn't require to have a driving license, that maybe that should be like maybe reintroduced as part of a staggered step, that if you don't have the driving license as a new start, we can get them in doing the delivery part of it. Obviously, to move on to the next part, you need to get your driving license, so on. But obviously, there's a caveat there, isn't it? Because you need drivers in delivery officers. But there were some thoughts that I had.
Yeah. Again, I think, as you say, most people that have obviously accepted the monthly pay, have taken the job knowing that it was monthly pay. For me, it's more about the amount of pay, and it's about the terms and conditions that are sitting in their contracts. Having the potential of having to make those concessions, if you like, when it comes to the negotiation, you would much rather something like that than, for example, the supplement. Let's pick something really simple, because again, it comes down to pay. You would much prefer leave something like that into a workforce where their wages are still the same, just the way they receive those wages is slightly different, rather than having people on different wages, not receiving the same supplements, the paid break thing as well, which is a nightmare to actually have in most offices that I've seen it operate, and not having paid meal release. Like these are the things that are fundamental to these new entrants. So yes, Scott, I take Peter's stance, because I'm always, listen, you've got to start at the top, and then as a negotiation happens, occasionally, only occasionally, does there need to be concessions made. But yes, obviously the starting point must be to try and make sure that we get them leveled up as soon as possible, and B, as close to, if not bang on, exactly what our legacy staff are.
Excellent. So there's some other changes. So we've had a redesign conference this year in some form. It's a restructuring of the union, where we've had a couple of national officers removed from the centre and a new central pillars officer introduced, and the health and safety section folding into the industrial departments. Now, I think broadly speaking, that's a positive, because the IR and health and safety now will sort of work together, or that should be the plan.
Yeah.
There's been quite a lot of lack of clarity about coming out. So I'm just wondering what, from your perspective, your experiences of those changes, and how you see maybe the future of it.
I agreed with the sentiment that yes, occasionally health and safety and IR, if you like, have always been very separate and very siloed in our union. And you only have to look so far as revisions and things like that, where IR have went down this route, health and safety have obviously then had to come in at the last minute. It would work really neatly if it was put together. Me personally, I think it's more about the individual. Dave Joyce was obviously a fantastic, dedicated person. Losing that knowledge, you can't replace that. However, we have to try. We've got a lot of skilled health and safety people running throughout our union. I've had the privilege of meeting a good few of them. That knowledge needs to make sure it stays as a strong voice at the top. How you integrate that into the industrial relations side of things, it can't just be as simple as having a health and safety guy there just to be there for. It needs to be integrated properly right throughout our structure, but that starts at the top. So we don't have the silo that we had before, where health and safety ran separately to industrial relations. But when we do put them together, and how we put them together, they have to work in tandem, and it has to be. I think a lot of our AS, our safety reps in particular, were worried about the link between them and how it gets through to headquarters, how they resolve issues, how they have their effective IR framework that runs alongside it and raising their issues for health and safety, and having that point of contact to make sure that their issues were getting raised at a higher level, and more importantly, getting resolved at a higher level. I've noticed the way the union kind of wants to do it, and I've noticed they're actually advertising for that health and safety role now as we're talking about it. That candidate, you're never going to bring in Dave Joyce too, if you like, and have that kind of knowledge replaced. But it needs to be somebody that's just as dedicated to the role as he was, because it's one thing that the safety reps would have always said. He was always on hand, and he was always there to be able to assist. However, he did kind of operate in a very, very siloed approach in comparison to the industrial relations side of things. So having that all under one umbrella does sound good. It's how it works practically in the field. And that's where we have to listen to the experienced safety reps that we've got out there and how we shape this. It can't just be presented to them as they need that input. They have to make sure that they have the input on how we do that, because health and safety in the workplace is just as crucial as industrial relations. And in quite a lot of cases, they go hand in hand with helping our members and assisting them in their workplace. But how that gets done needs to be done very delicately, and you need to speak to the experienced people and make sure that they have their input and they have their say on the future of the health and safety in our union, because it's just as crucial as the industrial relations side of things. It has to be hand in hand.
I agree with you. It's my experience is that I came into the IR side of stuff as a local rep, and I progressed through that aspect. And then it got to a point where I did wonder why there seemed to be an element of friction between health and safety and IR. Well, friction is probably not the right word, but they didn't seem to work in synergy as well as what perhaps that maybe historically did, or whatever. And I think that's a very, very good point that you make, that the need to be brought together to work together rather than just be brought in and then one takes over the other. Do you know what I mean? They're working together, because I do genuinely believe that if you've got two experts, one from an IR and one from an health and safety, then the outcome can only be better, because you're firing on full two cylinders rather than just one, you see. And I think you can bounce off if you get that working relationship. So I think you're right there, absolutely. Funny enough, in terms of escalation, that's where we in Leeds actually put an emergency motion to conference about it, because there is a escalation process within the health and safety, and obviously the officer was going, and we didn't know where it goes. So fortunately, they have clarified that it goes to the respective officer within the postal department for that final two, which is positive. But I think there's much work to be done there for sure.
Agreed.
So I think where we are with the I suppose revisions and such is very much about data-driven revisions at the minute, and this data. I don't know if you watched the Tony Booth session last week. One of our members from Wakefield had a question submitted, and you know, it was to do with a revision. And it's strange how, if there is proper engagement with the local rep, with the local knowledge, that the revisions can be broadly successful. But then when they go forward with that lack of input, then there seems to be this outcome where it's a catastrophe, quite frankly, and it's all based on data, and arguably the data that went in towards the end of that revision for the rest of the office wasn't as good as the data that was put in prior, you know, at the beginning of that journey. So we're in a position now where everything's data driven, and that's quite important, I think, for reps to understand that, and our members to sort of recognize that. And actually, as we then move forward, we're talking about artificial intelligence as well. So I'd like to explore that with you, and sort of your opinion of where you might go with it and the executive, in terms of making sure that the data they use for planning and how it weaves into artificial intelligence going forward, and what the defence is to make sure that our members are not using don't have the artificial intelligence used against them in an adverse effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah. For me, revisions, I've seen good ones, I've seen bad ones. But there's always a common denominator, and we had the perfect example for every single one of our members during the dispute. I mean, it was horrible, and it put our members through the ringer, if you like, stress levels and everything else by making duties far too big. But what it did demonstrate is kind of what the CW has always said for the very beginning when it comes to revisions. You need to make sure the local knowledge and the people are taken with you through the change. If you don't, you end up with revisions like we had during the dispute. Now, they could take a good while to fix those revisions, but for me, the best ones are always the ones where management, planners, reps listen to the members on the floor and listen to that local knowledge and stay not as far away from the data as possible, because occasionally it does kind of make sense, but the people need to be involved, because that's what corrects the mistakes that end up happening. That's what stops workloads getting completely out of control, because the computer says isn't good enough. And sometimes in revision activity, it can be a good guide, but it should only ever be a guide. The people should matter. What the people's input is always what makes a successful revision. Some of the inputs, I have seen some of the negotiations. I think, to be fair to Tony, he's hit the ground running. He's kind of had to, in his defence. He kind of had to. Revisions are always going to be tricky now. Before, they were always done by agreement. They were always done fully signed off. We obviously, unfortunately, had to go through ones where Royal Mail pretty much did what they want during the dispute. Going back and fixing all of them is going to take a lot of hassle. Where I struggle with revisions now, and especially offices that are going through revisions right now, is I have to question the motives of the business, because revisions aren't cheap at all. It costs the business quite a lot of money to implement them, and it takes quite a lot of time to go through them all. Now, we've already touched on the USO reform. Now, that's at best guess coming next year, wherever it may sit, however that comes through. I don't quite understand the business's logic for investing in revisions when you need to go back again come the USO change and retidy all that back up again. Unless, of course, they may be implementing revisions that are taking the new USO change into consideration, which I hope they're not. But when you look at certain offices, I've seen terrible revisions, absolute woeful revisions, but they're always the ones where the rep's been ignored. They've not really engaged with the staff correctly, especially during the dispute. But then, as you said, I mean, you can't ever say revisions are fantastic, because I don't think there will ever be a fantastic revision. I don't think that's possible. But where they've worked and they've not completely fell apart is when the people are taken along on the journey. So speaking to the postal workers, making sure every single person in the office gets their input, because every little piece of information helps in the output of that revision. So the data going in is just as important. However, the local knowledge is where the revisions are key, and we need to get back to that now, because obviously through the dispute, Royal Mail were happy to just lock themselves in their offices with their laptops and plough ahead with these changes. Now it's back to the time where it needs to start working with the union again, and more importantly, working with the members, and maybe get out of the office a little bit and speak to the people and take them along on the journey with you, because it's the only way you're going to be able to get a revision that's even slightly palatable for the membership.
Excellent. And I like how I suppose we're going full circle a little bit, because you've basically linked in about bringing the people on with you on the journey, but equally it's about the reconnect. So there's one thing I think Martin has done absolutely right on, is very much about we need to get back into the workplaces. That is, as an industrial trade union, and it's going to tie in nicely, I think, to Secret Squirrel's comment, which is, can you envision the union being an independent union in the near future? Well, I think if the reconnect is done properly, and we can start delivering some wins, and if there's a revision, it is being done successful. So Tony Boots, as you rightly point out, hit the ground running, documents come out, revisions have been halted, sort of reviewing, I think, some of the ones which have been deployed a little bit. Little wins in that sense, and hopefully we can get them ironed out. But as well with the reconnect, it's about trying to find these issues. And if we can't get them through the industrial relations framework to get outcomes, we then need to get these individual issues, collective issues in some sense, into the judicial system using the legal services arm. And I think there needs to be a bit more investment on that side to try and get wins. Now, from our perspective in Leeds, we're taking on people's issues, whether it be a discrimination case, we're talking about attendance. If there may be unlawful deduction of wages. And quite frankly, with people being on monthly pay, there has been episodes where overtime has not been paid. So we're having, or even following the dispute, sick pay being withheld. So we need to get into the judicial system. And I think that is a key thing about reconnecting, getting the wins, and actually growing the union again. Is that sort of your view on how you've been approaching it in Edinburgh, and is that what you'd like to look at rolling out, or is there anything else you want to bring to the table?
Yeah, reconnecting was a really good idea, and it was one of the things when Martin was talking about it through his campaign. I was like, yeah, That's really good. How it's been implemented out there in the field does look pretty good as well. You're actually seeing, but for me, that's always the way you should always be building a union. The fact that we're only literally just talking about national officers having to visit workplaces. Look, I've said it numerous times throughout my campaign. The only way a union stays strong is the boots we've got on the ground. What makes our union so special and so unique is the fact that we've got structures going from local right up to national. But that doesn't allow people that are sitting in national positions to stay at 150 the Broadway. How are you supposed to make sure that you're engaged with the workforce if you're not in there speaking to them all the time? And you do need to mix it up because there is different issues wherever you go. Yes, the older adjectives, you can always speak to a postal worker, and chances are the moans and the complaints are always the same. But they do have different issues depending on where you go. And getting out and about and reconnecting, putting those boots on the ground is going to be how we rebuild. No shadow of a doubt, if we're going to get our members switched back on again and get us back even close to a level where we were before the dispute, it's all going to be about the little wins, and it's going to be about us getting out there, giving the reps the confidence in the system again, because I do think they've lost a little bit of faith in us as well, which, again, we have to win that faith back now by starting to assist them and starting to help them get their little wins in the workplaces and bigger wins further down the road as well, because it's the only way we rebuild. But to answer the question, I can't remember the name now, actually.
Secret Squirrel.
That's the one, Secret Squirrel, sorry. To answer this question, well, I've still got air in my lungs. I will always shout for the CW to remain standalone. It is a special and unique union in the trade union movement. And I think the things that make us special and unique would disappear under any other umbrella. I understand we've got some difficult decisions down the road. But what I will promise is this: as long as I've got air in my lungs, I am not comfortable with us going under any other type of umbrella, because I think we will lose what makes us special in the workplace as a CW.
Here. And to be fair, we don't want to see too much blue and white, do we, Owen? So we need to see more pink.
Absolutely, Scott.
So I think we're probably boxing off a little bit now. So I think we've covered a wrap of areas. I think we've covered the bulk of your election address. One, I think, short thing. We've heard the leadership and a number of people talking about expanding the role of postal workers. Has any ideas actually been spoken of? Because I mean, I've got a list of things that I keep jotting down, but nothing seems to be forthcoming. No. Is there any obvious ones that either you've come across or that maybe you want to share from your perspective?
I like listening because Dave Ward pushes this quite a lot, and he speaks about the role of the postal worker quite a lot. Has it came to anything since the conversations have started? Not really. I think we had a lot of great opportunities during COVID to really expand our trust in the communities. And we kind of missed quite a lot of opportunities there for me. I called it quite a lot of times during COVID, the opportunities that we could have had. Obviously, we did secure fantastic things, some of the contracts we had with the NHS and everything else, but we could have pushed that so much further. That trust on the doorstep's on. But where I think Dave struggles is you've got a company that doesn't look further than 6 months ahead. We're a private business, that's no secret. And most private companies don't operate more than 6 months in advance because all they care about is the next dividend payout. So to try and turn around a big business like Royal Mail and to try and make them see the bigger picture is going to be difficult. But look, I fully support any sort of thing that's going to help the role of the postal worker going out there. We've spitballed quite a few ideas when it comes to postal workers. We do have to be careful we don't start stealing other workers' work as well, though, especially as we're a trade union. But there is opportunities out there for us to try and expand it. I think it's the employer that tends to be the biggest obstacle, as I say, because trying to get a major corporation, which is what Royal Mail is now effectively, to look more than 6 months ahead is very difficult. So when you hear Dave Ward talk about trying to expand the role of a postal worker, you need to be dealing with people on the other side of the table that share a vision about the business being successful for the next 500 years. And that's quite rare in a private company.
So it's a tall tall ask, a big job on hand. So I think in terms of where we will be, I think what we need to emphasise is the power is in your hands as a member of the CWU to select your preference on who you want on the executive. I mean, from our perspective, I mean, I'm priding myself as being the only independent stream in terms of Leeds because we haven't got a candidate on the slate. The closest we've got is Saf, who's actually born in Yorkshire, but he wasn't even in the Leeds branch area. So that's it. So as far as I'm concerned, we are truly independent. We're not biased on anyone. We haven't done any deals because we're not trying to get anyone into position. But I genuinely think that Owain absolutely needs to be on the NEC and as well as the PEC selections because he is the future in terms of he's got the youth, he's got quite a lot of experience, he's got the geography spread, and to be fair, I think he's already come forward, hasn't he? He's not backwards at coming forward. So that's the type of candidate I'd like to see on the executive. So if there's anything else you want to add, Owain, this is the opportunity, and then we'll close.
Yes, first thing, Scott, I want to thank everybody from your branch for the support. I think it's been fantastic. It is quite a nice place not a nice place. You always want to see candidates coming forward and being put forward. But yes, I suppose in terms of neutrality, you're as close to being neutral as you possibly can. Listen, the support I'm receiving has been absolutely fantastic. But it doesn't mean anything unless the membership starts voting. Like, it's no secret, the turnouts in these elections are historically normally not too great. But it's something that needs to change. It really is. These elections are so important and so crucial. So yeah, I mean, I think the ballot papers get released tomorrow now. My days are starting to bleed into each other. All I would say is, please, members, you need to vote in these elections. Turnout sometimes is just as important as the result. Obviously, I would love to be elected on the executive. I've got some great ideas, and I can't wait to roll my sleeves up and get stuck in if I am fortunate to be chosen. But I'd much prefer an engaged membership and making sure that everybody turns out their votes. So please, everybody, please make sure you cast your votes. But again, Scott, thank you so much. Your support's very much appreciated. And yeah, thanks for having me on. This has been a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, regardless of the outcome, Owain, you're always welcome to come have another stream, come into Leeds, Wakefield, wherever. And with that, our nomination recommendations will be published formally tomorrow. But for now, Owain, thank you, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you again soon. Unity is strength.